The map had one empty place. Not a small mistake. Not a forgotten moon or a dead system hidden behind dust. This was a wide white wound in the middle of the Orion Trade Network, a region large enough to hold hundreds of stars, maybe thousands, and yet every official chart called it nothing. No name. No coordinates. No warning. Just blank space. Archivist Lyra Vaughn stood in the central map chamber of the TRX Dominion and stared at it until her eyes began to ache. Around that empty region the galaxy was perfect. Every star had a number. Every trade route had a color. Every colony, mining belt, fuel station, and military boundary had been marked with obsessive care. The Dominion loved order. It survived because of order. But this place broke the map. Behind her, Junior Aide Marrick shifted nervously. "You are looking at it again?" he said. Lyra did not turn. "Yes. You always look at it when something terrible is about to happen." "That is not true." "It is very true." Lyra raised one thin hand toward the blank region. "Do you know what bothers me most? That it is forbidden? No. That ships vanished there? No. That 3 councils have refused to discuss it in open session? No." Marrick hesitated. "Then what?" Lyra's voice dropped. "That no one wrote forbidden on it." Marrick went silent. That was the thing. Civilizations marked danger. They named black holes, radiation storms, war zones, plague worlds, unstable gates. They wrote warnings in red. They placed beacons. They added laws. But this region had none of that. The galaxy had simply agreed to leave it empty. As if naming it would attract attention. As if attention itself was dangerous. Marrick stepped closer, lowering his voice though they were alone. "You know what lives there?" Lyra finally looked at him. "Humans," he whispered. The word seemed too small for the silence it created. Humans. A species with no empire, no Grand Council seat, no formal expansion charter. A species surrounded by rumor instead of diplomacy. Traders avoided their borders. Military ships gave them distance. Surveyors pretended their routes never passed near them. And the official map stayed blank. Lyra turned back to the white space. 3 days ago, the Dominion High Directorate had ordered her to prepare a contact mission. Not conquest. Not inspection. A request. The fastest trade corridor to the eastern spiral passed straight through human-controlled space. Using it would save 6 months of travel and billions in fuel. Someone had finally decided the blank space was too expensive to ignore. Marrick swallowed hard. "We are not going there," he said. Lyra folded her hands behind her back. "We are going to the border," she said. "And we are going to knock." The file on humans was thinner than it should have been. Lyra noticed that immediately. For a region that large, for a species that had existed in galactic records for over 3 centuries, the archive should have been dense, layered with surveys, cultural notes, trade logs, incident reports, diplomatic transcripts. Instead, the file contained fragments. Short entries. Redacted sections. Entire pages marked with classification seals higher than her clearance. And between those fragments, something worse. Careful language. She sat in the quiet of her ship's study as it drifted toward the edge of mapped space, scrolling through the report again. Initial contact, stable. Subsequent interactions, variable. Conflict events, limited but decisive. Further engagement, not recommended without preparation. Not recommended. That was how the Dominion described unstable suns and collapsing wormholes. Marrick stood in the doorway watching her. "You've reached the missing part, haven't you?" he said. "There are many missing parts." He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. The Durathi incident. Lyra paused. Every species had one story about humans. For the Dominion it was the Durathi. She opened the sealed subsection. Not fully accessible, but enough fragments had leaked over time that the shape of the event was known. 12 ships, Marrick said quietly. Survey vessels. Yes. Unarmed. Yes. They entered human space. Lyra nodded. Marrick's voice dropped even further. And only one came back. Silence filled the room. Lyra scrolled to the final entry. Return vessel, confirmed. Crew, 1 survivor. Pilot. Debrief sealed. Public statement. Navigational loss. Navigational loss. Marrick let out a dry, humorless breath. We both know that's not true. Yes. The pilot didn't speak for 3 years. I know. And when she finally did. The record was sealed the same day, Lyra finished. Marrick sat down slowly across from her. That is not how the Dominion handles accidents, he said. No. That is how it handles mistakes. Lyra leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled. What do you think they saw? Marek asked. She considered that. There were no descriptions. No footage. No analysis reports. Just silence. And silence in the Dominion archives was never empty. It was deliberate. I think, Lyra said slowly, they saw something they were not prepared to understand. Marek shook his head. No. That's not it. Then what? They saw something they understood perfectly, he said, and wished they hadn't. The ship hummed softly around them as it crossed another invisible coordinate boundary. Outside the viewport, the stars had begun to thin, not in number but in familiarity. They were leaving charted space. Marek looked toward the window, then back at Lyra. 4 species have tested human space, he said. Do you know how many tested it twice? Lyra didn't answer. None, he said. She closed the file. That was the part no one wrote down directly. Not in reports. Not in treaties. Not in official statements. But it was there between every line. Whatever happened inside that blank space. It only needed to happen once. Lyra stood. Prepare the communication protocols, she said. Marek stared at her. You're serious? Yes. We still don't know what they'll do. Lyra walked toward the door. No, she said. But we know what they did. She paused, hand resting on the frame. And that is exactly why we will not make the same mistake. Behind her, Marek didn't move. Which mistake? He asked quietly. Lyra glanced back at him. The one where you go in, she said, without announcing yourself. The stars outside shifted slightly as the ship adjusted course. Ahead of them, somewhere beyond the last labeled coordinate, the blank space waited. They reached the edge of the map without seeing it. Lyra had expected something. A boundary beacon. A warning signal. A change in light or gravity or instrumentation. Some clear dividing line between what the Dominion knew and what it did not. There was nothing. One moment, the navigation console displayed clean coordinates, star names, route overlays. The next, the labels disappeared. The stars remained, burning exactly as they had before, but now they had no names. No identifiers. No registry tags. Just light. Marek leaned forward slowly, staring at the console. The system's lost sync, he said. It hasn't, Lyra replied. He tapped the display again as if pressing harder might restore the missing data. No, he whispered after a moment. It hasn't. The ship drifted in silence. It felt different. Not emptier. Fuller. As if the space around them contained more than their instruments could describe. Marek sat back in his chair. That's it, he said. That's the line. Lyra nodded once. No one had drawn it. No one had marked it. And yet, everyone knew where it was. The ship continued forward another hour before the station appeared. It was smaller than Lyra expected. Not a fortress. Not a military outpost bristling with weapons or surveillance arrays. Just a structure. Functional. Worn in places. Quietly maintained. Lights blinked in a standard docking pattern. Marek stared at it, confused. That's it, he said. Lyra didn't answer immediately. She had imagined something else too. Something that warned you to turn around. Something that justified the silence in the archives. But this looked ordinary. Docking confirmation flashed across the console. Authorized approach, Bay 3. Marek swallowed. They're letting us in. Yes. Just like that. Yes. That's not right. Lyra studied the station carefully. No, she said. It's not what we expected. The ship aligned with the docking corridor. As they moved closer, details came into view. External plating repairs, minor structural mismatches, signs of long-term use rather than careful display. It looked lived in. Not defended. That was worse. Marek noticed it too. This place doesn't look afraid of anything, he said quietly. Lyra didn't respond. Because he was right. A species that feared invasion built walls. A species that expected threats built weapons. The station did neither. The docking clamps engaged with a soft metallic thud. A moment later, the corridor pressurized. A signal blinked green. Airlock open. Marek stood slowly. We can still leave, he said. No, Lyra replied. They haven't locked us in yet. They haven't tried to. That's exactly the problem. Lyra stepped toward the airlock. Marek. He looked at her. We came here to ask, she said. Not to guess. He hesitated. Then followed. The airlock door slid open. Warm air met them first. Not sterile. Not artificial. Warm. The corridor beyond was simple, clean, well-lit, with markings along the floor and walls that their translator had not yet fully processed. And at the far end, someone was waiting. A human, leaning slightly against the wall, holding a small device in one hand, as if this were a routine part of their day. He looked up when the door opened, saw them, and smiled. "Hey," he said. Marek froze. Lyra did not. She stepped forward. "I am Archivist Lyra Vaughn of the TRX Dominion," she said, her voice steady. "We are requesting formal diplomatic contact regarding transit negotiations." "Yeah," the human said, pushing himself off the wall. "We got the message." He glanced at them both, completely at ease. "You're here about the corridor, right?" Lyra paused for a fraction of a second. "Yes." "Figured," he said. "Makes sense. It's a good shortcut." Marek stared at him. At his relaxed posture. At the casual tone. At the complete absence of tension. This was not how first contact at a forbidden border was supposed to feel. The human took a sip from a container in his hand, then gestured down the corridor. "Come on," he said. "We'll get you processed." Lyra exchanged a brief glance with Marek. Then she walked forward. Behind her, Marek followed. Like a man stepping through a door that had always been closed, and had suddenly opened. The processing room looked like every other customs office Lyra had ever seen. That was the first problem. The second problem was that nothing about it felt wrong. Clean surfaces. Functional lighting. A desk with a data interface. A side wall with storage compartments. Even a small seating area that suggested waiting was sometimes required. Normal. Painfully, completely normal. The human behind the desk introduced himself as Evan, without title, rank, or formality. He sat down, gestured casually for them to do the same, and pulled up their entry file as if this were routine. "All right," he said. "Just gonna run through standard entry stuff. Shouldn't take long." Marek remained standing for a moment longer than necessary before slowly sitting down, his movements stiff. Lyra sat opposite Evan, posture straight, attention sharp. "You maintain a customs protocol at your border," she said. Evan blinked once, then smiled slightly. "Yeah," he said. "Most places do." "Yes," Lyra said. "But most places mark their borders." Evan shrugged lightly. "We know where it is." "That is not the same thing." "Works for us," he said. Marek shifted beside her. Lyra studied Evan carefully. His tone wasn't dismissive. It wasn't defensive either. It was simple. As if the question itself didn't carry the weight she expected. Evan tapped something on his console. "Okay," he said. "Names, species designation, diplomatic clearance. Yeah, that all checks out." He glanced up at them. "First time in human space?" "Yes," Lyra said. "Cool," he replied like it actually was. Marek's fingers tightened slightly on the edge of his seat. Evan continued scrolling. "All right, so here's how this goes. We verify your credentials, run a quick environmental compatibility scan, nothing invasive, and then we get you set up with local comm access." He said it like he'd said it 1,000 times before. Because he probably had. Lyra leaned forward slightly. "You process arrivals frequently?" she asked. "Depends," Evan said. "Not a ton of diplomatic ones, but traffic comes through." "From outside your space?" "Sometimes." Marek looked at Lyra quickly. "Sometimes?" Lyra kept her voice even. "And those vessels are received without incident?" Evan paused for half a second. "Not long. But long enough." "Most of the time," he said. Marek inhaled quietly. Lyra did not react outwardly. Instead, she changed direction. "Your system does not differentiate between vessel types prior to identification," she said. Evan looked at her, head tilting slightly. "That's a pretty specific question." "It is relevant." "Yeah," he said slowly. "It is." He leaned back in his chair, studying her now with more attention. "Short answer," he said. "No. Not really." Lyra held his gaze. "Explain." "If something crosses our border without ID, without notification, without a signal we recognize," he said, choosing his words carefully now, "our systems treat it as unknown. Unknown is not the same as hostile." "Depends," Evan said quietly. Marek's breath caught slightly. Lyra did not break eye contact. "On what?" she asked. Evan didn't answer immediately. For the first time since they arrived. The room felt different. Not hostile. Not tense. But precise. Measured. "On context," he said finally. "On speed. On trajectory. On behavior." He paused. "And on history." Lyra absorbed that. "So your response is automatic," she said. "Parts of it," Evan replied. And once initiated? Evan looked at her for a long moment. Then he gave a small, almost apologetic smile. It's fast, he said. Silence settled between them. Marek looked down at his hands. Lyra leaned back slightly. Understood, she said. Evan nodded once, then shifted back to his console. All right, he said, tone light again like a switch had flipped back. Let's get you through the scan. He stood and gestured toward a side room. 30 seconds, he added. Just checks for anything that might cause problems in either direction. Lyra stood immediately. Marek followed, slower. As they moved toward the scanning room, his voice came low, barely audible. That's it, he whispered. Lyra didn't look at him. That's enough, she said. Because now she understood something important. The fear wasn't in the system. It wasn't in the station. It wasn't even in the humans. It was in what happened. When the system decided. And the system, she realized, did not ask twice. The scan took exactly 30 seconds. No alarms. No questions. No complications. A soft light passed over them, paused, then vanished. Evan checked his console, nodded once, and gestured back toward the main room. All good, he said. You're clear. That was it. Marek looked almost offended by how uneventful it was. That's the entire health protocol? He asked. Yeah, Evan said. What were you expecting? Marek opened his mouth, then closed it again. Lyra stepped forward. We anticipated more scrutiny. Evan gave a small shrug. You're here officially, he said. You announced yourselves. That's most of the work done. There was again. That quiet emphasis. Announced. Lyra filed it carefully. Evan slid a physical folder across the desk. Lyra noticed that immediately. Paper. Actual printed material. We like backups, Evan said, noticing her glance. Systems glitch sometimes. Lyra opened the folder. Inside. Entry clearance documentation. Communication registration. Contact details. A city map. Everything was clear. Organized. Practical. Efficient. Too efficient. Marek leaned slightly closer. There's a map? He whispered. Yes. He looked confused. Why a physical map? Lyra didn't answer. She was already looking at it. The map was detailed. Streets, districts, transit lines, government buildings, clearly marked routes. But in the top corner, a smaller regional display. And there, she froze. On the far side of the border, where Dominion space should have been, there was nothing. No labels. No names. No territorial markings. Just blank. The same blankness. Mirrored. Lyra looked up slowly. You do not map external space, she said. Evan glanced at the map, then back at her. Not in detail, he said. Why? He shrugged lightly. Figured if people wanted us to know where they were, he said, they'd tell us. Marek stared at him. That is, not standard practice. Yeah, Evan said. We've heard that. Lyra studied him. There was no arrogance in his tone. No defensiveness. Just a different assumption. She closed the folder slowly. Everything appears in order, she said. Great, Evan replied. He stood and checked something on his console. Transport to the capital leaves in about 2 hours, he said. Basics. I'd recommend that overflying yourself. Traffic, there's a mess. Traffic. Marek blinked. You have congestion issues? Evan smiled slightly. You'll see. Lyra nodded once. One question, she said. Sure. The officer who responded to our initial transmission. Yeah. Is there a way to confirm our safe arrival to the border station? Evan paused. Just briefly. Then nodded. Yeah, we can log that, he said. It'll go through official channels. Thank you. No problem. He picked up his device again, already moving on. Safe travels, he added casually. The way someone says it when they mean it. Not as a warning. Not as a formality. Just a habit. Lyra turned and walked out of the room. Marek followed, silent. They reached a waiting area near the transport bay and sat down. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Marek leaned forward, elbows on his knees. There was a plant, he said. Lyra glanced at him. What? In the office, he said. On the window. Yes. It wasn't doing anything. Lyra blinked once. Plants generally do not. I know, Marek said quickly. That's not the point. He looked at his hands. I've been preparing for this for 6 days, he said. I've been thinking about the missing ships, the sealed records, the silence. He gestured vaguely. And it's just this. Lyra looked out toward the docking bay. where human workers moved back and forth carrying equipment, talking, laughing, living normal. I don't know if that makes it better or worse, Marek said quietly. Lyra didn't answer immediately, because she was thinking the same thing. They had expected danger. What they found was ordinary, and something about that didn't feel safe at all. The transport to the capital arrived without ceremony. No escort ships. No security sweep. No formal announcement. It simply docked, opened its doors and began boarding. Lyra and Marek stepped inside with a handful of other passengers. Humans carrying bags, talking to each other, checking devices, completely uninterested in the fact that two off-world diplomats had just entered their space. No one stared. No one reacted. No one cared. That, Marek decided, was deeply unsettling. They found seats near the viewport. As the transport lifted away from the station, Marek leaned closer to the glass. I expected, he began. Yes, Lyra said. The stars shifted as the ship accelerated. Still unnamed. Still untagged. Human space remained unmarked even from within. After a few minutes, something appeared below. Lights. At first scattered, then growing, then spreading until they formed something vast. The capital. Marek sat back slowly. That's, he said, unable to finish. Lyra leaned forward slightly, watching. She had seen cities across 9 systems. None of them looked like this. This city didn't rise in organized tiers or structured layers. It spread. Outward, sideways, irregular, like something alive. Tall structures stood beside low ones. Old architecture merged into new. Lines blurred instead of holding shape. And everywhere, movement. Even from this height, the city felt active. Full. Uncontained. It's not planned, Marek said. It is, Lyra replied quietly. Just not in the way we plan. The transport descended. As they approached the surface, more details emerged. Roads filled with moving vehicles. Walkways crowded with people. Light sources layered on top of each other. Green spaces threaded through everything. It's loud, Marek said. You can't hear it from here. I can tell. The transport docked. The doors opened. And the sound hit them immediately. Not noise. Life. Voices overlapping. Footsteps echoing. Machinery humming. Music somewhere in the distance. Announcements filtering through the air. Nothing aggressive. Nothing chaotic. Just constant. Marek stopped for half a second. Not frozen. But slowed. Like his body needed time to process the density of it. Keep moving, Lyra said quietly. He nodded and followed. They stepped into the flow of people. Humans moved around them without hesitation. Close proximity. Minimal personal space. No visible discomfort. A species comfortable with contact. Comfortable with presence. That was new. Marek's eyes moved rapidly, left, right, forward, cataloging everything. Clothing differences. Physical variation. Behavioral patterns. They don't match, he murmured. What? Each other, he said. They don't match each other. Lyra noticed it too. Different heights. Different structures. Different features. More variation within the species than most civilizations displayed across entire regions. And yet, they moved as one. Not uniform, but unified. At the far end of the terminal, a human stood holding a small display. Lyra's name was on it. No banner. No delegation. No ceremony. Just a man waiting. He looked up as they approached. Archivist Vaughn, he said. Yes. He stepped forward and extended his hand. I'm Director Hale, he said. Transit Authority. Lyra paused for the briefest moment, then took his hand. The grip was firm. Direct. Uncomplicated. No ritual. No layered meaning. Just contact. Travel okay? Hale asked. Yes. Good. We've got your accommodations ready. Figured you'd want to settle before we start anything formal. He glanced at Marek. You all right? Marek blinked. Yes, he said. Hale nodded once, satisfied. Cool. Let's walk, he said. Walk. Marek repeated. It's close. They stepped out of the terminal and into the city. The scale changed immediately. Buildings rose around them, not in clean lines but in overlapping forms. Old stone beside reflective glass. Narrow structures beside wide ones. Nothing matched. Everything worked. People passed them constantly. No one stopped. A child looked up at Lyra as they crossed the street. You're not from here, the child said. No, Lyra replied. Where are you from? Far away. The child considered that seriously. How far? Very. The signal changed. The child's guardian pulled them gently along. The child kept looking back until they disappeared into the crowd. Hale glanced at Lyra. "Sorry," he said. "Kids. It was not a problem. They're not taught to be cautious about outsiders," he added. "They should be." "Maybe," Hale said. "They're taught other things first." They continued walking. The city moved around them. Alive. That's unafraid. And somewhere beneath all of it, Lyra felt it. Not danger. Not exactly. Something else. Something deeper. Something that didn't come from what the humans were doing, but from what they clearly didn't need to do. They didn't posture. They didn't guard. They didn't perform strength. Because they didn't have to. And that was the first moment Lyra truly understood why the map was blank. Not because no one knew what was there, but because no one knew what to call it. The transport to the capital arrived without ceremony. No escort ships. No security sweep. No formal announcement. It simply docked, opened its doors and began boarding. Lyra and Marek stepped inside with a handful of other passengers. Humans carrying bags, talking to each other, checking devices, completely uninterested in the fact that two off-world diplomats had just entered their space. No one stared. No one reacted. No one cared. That, Marek decided, was deeply unsettling. They found seats near the viewport. As the transport lifted away from the station, Marek leaned closer to the glass. "I expected," he began. "Yes," Lyra said. The stars shifted as the ship accelerated. Still unnamed. Still untagged. Human space remained unmarked even from within. After a few minutes, something appeared below. Lights. At first scattered, then growing, then spreading until they formed something vast. The capital. Marek sat back slowly. "That's," he said, unable to finish. Lyra leaned forward slightly, watching. She had seen cities across 9 systems. None of them looked like this. This city didn't rise in organized tiers or structured layers. It spread. Outward, sideways, irregular, like something alive. Tall structures stood beside low ones. Old architecture merged into new. Lines blurred instead of holding shape. And everywhere, movement. Even from this height, the city felt active. Full. Uncontained. "It's not planned," Marek said. "It is," Lyra replied quietly. "Just not in the way we plan." The transport descended. As they approached the surface, more details emerged. Roads filled with moving vehicles. Walkways crowded with people. Light sources layered on top of each other. Green spaces threaded through everything. "It's loud," Marek said. "You can't hear it from here." "I can tell." The transport docked. The doors opened. And the sound hit them immediately. Not noise. Life. Voices overlapping. Footsteps echoing. Machinery humming. Music somewhere in the distance. Announcements filtering through the air. Nothing aggressive. Nothing chaotic. Just constant. Marek stopped for half a second. Not frozen. But slowed. Like his body needed time to process the density of it. "Keep moving," Lyra said quietly. He nodded and followed. They stepped into the flow of people. Humans moved around them without hesitation. Close proximity. Minimal personal space. No visible discomfort. A species comfortable with contact. Comfortable with presence. That was new. Marek's eyes moved rapidly, left, right, forward, cataloging everything. Clothing differences. Physical variation. Behavioral patterns. "They don't match," he murmured. "What?" "Each other," he said. "They don't match each other." Lyra noticed it too. Different heights. Different structures. Different features. More variation within the species than most civilizations displayed across entire regions. And yet, they moved as one. Not uniform, but unified. At the far end of the terminal, a human stood holding a small display. Lyra's name was on it. No banner. No delegation. No ceremony. Just a man waiting. He looked up as they approached. "Archivist Vaughn?" he said. "Yes." He stepped forward and extended his hand. "I'm Director Hale," he said. "Transit Authority." Lyra paused for the briefest moment, then took his hand. The grip was firm. Direct. Uncomplicated. No ritual. No layered meaning. Just contact. "Travel okay?" Hale asked. "Yes." "Good. We've got your accommodations ready. Figured you'd want to settle before we start anything formal." He glanced at Marek. "You all right?" Marek blinked. "Yes," he said. Hale nodded once, satisfied. "Cool. Let's walk," he said. "Walk." Marek repeated. "It's close." They stepped out of the terminal and into the city. The scale changed immediately. Buildings rose around them, not in clean lines but in overlapping forms. Old stone beside reflective glass. Narrow structures beside wide ones. Nothing matched. Everything worked. People passed them constantly. No one stopped. A child looked up at Lyra as they crossed the street. "You're not from here?" the child said. "No," Lyra replied. "Where are you from?" "Far away." The child considered that seriously. "How far?" "Very." The signal changed. The child's guardian pulled them gently along. The child kept looking back until they disappeared into the crowd. Hale glanced at Lyra. "Sorry," he said. "Kids." It was not a problem. "They're not taught to be cautious about outsiders," he added. "They should be." "Maybe," Hale said. "They're taught other things first." They continued walking. The city moved around them. Alive. That's unafraid. And somewhere beneath all of it, Lyra felt it. Not danger. Not exactly. Something else. Something deeper. Something that didn't come from what the humans were doing, but from what they clearly didn't need to do. They didn't posture. They didn't guard. They didn't perform strength. Because they didn't have to. And that was the first moment Lyra truly understood why the map was blank. Not because no one knew what was there, but because no one knew what to call it. Dinner was not diplomatic. That was the first thing Lyra understood. The second was that it was intentional. The restaurant sat 3 streets from their residence, warm with layered light and filled with the steady hum of conversation. No private chamber. No controlled seating arrangement. No formal protocol. Just tables. People. Movement. Life. Director Hale led them inside with the ease of someone who had done this many times. "This is where we usually bring visiting delegates," he said. "Good food. No pressure." "No pressure," Marek repeated under his breath, like he was testing the words for flaws. They were seated at a long table. Hale. A woman named Isha, legal advisor. An older man called Brennan, logistics. A quieter figure at the end, advisor Cole. Lyra noted him immediately. He said nothing, but he was watching everything. The food arrived quickly. Different textures. Different scents. Carefully labeled items placed near Lyra and Marek. Safe. Prepared. Considered. Marek picked up one of the labeled dishes and examined it like it might explain something. "They adjusted for us," he said quietly. "Yes," Lyra replied. "They didn't have to." "No." Marek looked around the table. "They did anyway." Across from them, the conversation had already shifted. Not to trade routes. Not to negotiations. To something else. "I'm telling you the call was wrong," Brennan was saying, gesturing with his hands. There was still time left. "You don't make that move that early." "You absolutely do," Isha replied. "You lock it in before it gets unstable. That's not how the system works." "That is exactly how it works." Hale leaned back slightly, smiling. "They're arguing about a game," he said to Lyra. Lyra nodded slowly. She understood perhaps half of the references. But she understood the tone. Engaged. Animated. Invested. No hierarchy. No tension. No careful positioning. Just people who cared about something that didn't matter. Marek watched them completely still. "They're loud," he said. "They're interested," Lyra corrected. "That feels different." "Because it is." The argument continued. Voices rising slightly. Hands moving. Points made and dismissed and reshaped. No resolution. No need for one. At the far end of the table, Cole met Lyra's gaze. And smiled. Not broadly. Just knowingly. "You visited the central square," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "The monument." "Yes." Cole nodded once, turning his cup slightly in his hands. "Most visitors notice that," he said. "It is difficult not to." "Some don't," he replied. "Depends what they're looking for." Lyra considered that. "What does it represent?" she asked. Cole glanced toward Hale. Hale exhaled lightly. "It's a memorial," he said. "To what?" Hale paused. "Not long. But long enough." "A period," he said, "when things got bad." Isha and Brennan were still arguing. No one else at the table reacted. Lyra leaned forward slightly. "Define bad." Hale looked at the table. At the food. At the people around him. Then back at her. "We lost about a third of the population," he said. Marek stopped breathing for a second. Lyra didn't move. "A third?" she repeated. "Yes." "How long?" "About 60 years." Silence settled over her side of the table. not across it. The argument continued uninterrupted, because for them, this was known, understood, integrated. And then? Lyra asked. Hale shrugged slightly. We rebuilt. No emphasis. No pride. No performance. Just a statement. Cole spoke again, voice quiet. The monument isn't there to remind us of what we lost, he said. Lyra looked at him. It's there so we don't forget what we became to survive it. That landed. Merrick's hands tightened slightly around his cup. They stayed, he said. Yes, Hale replied. They didn't leave. No. They didn't disperse. Or relocate. No. They just kept going, Lyra said. Hale nodded once. Yeah. Across the table, Brennan laughed suddenly, the argument breaking into something lighter. Isha shook her head, smiling. The tension dissolved instantly, as if it had never existed. Marek looked between them, confused. How do they do that? He whispered. What? They escalate, he said. Then they just stop. Lyra didn't answer, because she was seeing it too. Intensity without fragility. Engagement without damage. Control without visible effort. Cole watched her again. You're trying to reconcile it, he said. Yes. Don't, he replied. Lyra blinked once. Why? Because it's not one thing, he said. It's both. The warmth, he added, gesturing lightly toward the table. And the other part. The part we haven't seen, Lyra said. Cole held her gaze. You don't see it unless you give it a reason to show up. Marek looked down at his cup. The Durathi ships, he said quietly. No one at the table reacted strongly. No defensiveness. No denial. Just acknowledgement. Hale nodded once. They didn't announce themselves, he said. They were a survey team. They crossed a border without contact. That's not the same as hostility. Hale didn't argue. He just said, it is from our side. Silence settled again. Soft this time. Understanding, not tension. Marek leaned back slowly. So the rule is simple, he said. Yes, Hale replied. Announce yourself. Yes. And if you don't? Hale didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because Lyra understood now. The warmth was real. The normality was real. The laughter. The arguments. The food. The plants. All of it. Real. And beneath it, something else. Not hidden. Not suppressed. Conditional. And that was the part the galaxy had never learned to describe. So instead, it had left a blank space. The meeting room was quiet. Not empty quiet. The kind of quiet that comes from people who don't waste motion. Large windows. Clean lines. A long table designed for function, not display. No banners. No symbols of dominance. Just space. Lyra entered with Marek at her side. Hale was already there along with Isha, Brennan, Cole, and 3 others. A woman introduced as Director Sloan. A legal officer named Chin. And an older man who did not give a title. Lyra noticed him immediately. He sat slightly apart from the main line. Watching. The meeting began without ceremony. Credentials confirmed. Authorization verified. Recording initiated. Then, Lyra presented the proposal. Transit through human space. Economic benefits. Trade efficiency. Time saved. Clear. Structured. Logical. She had prepared extensively. She expected resistance. She did not get it. Sloan listened, then nodded once. The route itself isn't a problem, she said. Marek blinked. Lyra remained still. It stays outside our inhabited systems, Sloan continued. Low interaction. Minimal interference. She paused. There are 3 conditions. Lyra inclined her head. Proceed. Sloan gestured to Chin. Notification window, Chin said. 72 hours prior entry. Acceptable. Deviation protocols, he continued. Any change in course must be reported immediately. Also acceptable. He glanced at the older man. The 3rd is the historical access clause. Lyra focused. Clarify. The older man leaned forward slightly. His voice was calm. Practiced. The clause states that access rights apply only to registered, identified and pre-notified vessels, he said. Lyra nodded. That is standard. It also states, he continued, what happens when those conditions are not met. Silence settled. Marek didn't move. Lyra kept her voice steady. Explain. The man looked at her. Not challenging. Not defensive. Just direct. You already know, he said. Lyra didn't look away. The Durathi incident, she said. No reaction around the table. No shift in posture. No discomfort. Just recognition. Yes, Sloane said. 12 ships, Lyra continued. No prior contact, Chin added. No identification signal, Hale said quietly. They entered under survey authority, Lyra said. They entered our space, Sloane replied, without announcing themselves. The difference sat between them. Clear. Unavoidable. Marek spoke, his voice tight. One ship returned. Yes. The pilot did not speak for 3 years. Sloane nodded once. She was present when the response triggered. Response? Marek repeated. The older man spoke again. Our border systems operate on layered protocols, he said. Detection. Classification. Response. And classification failed? Lyra asked. No, he said. Classification defaulted. To what? To unknown. Silence. And unknown is treated as? Marek asked. The man held his gaze. As a potential threat, he said. Lyra absorbed that. And the response? The man paused. Not to hide. But to choose accuracy. Fast, he said. Marek looked down. Lyra leaned slightly forward. The one ship that returned, she said. Why? Hale answered this time. They transmitted an identification signal, he said. Late but in time. In time to what? Interrupt the response. Interrupt. That word carried weight. Lyra understood it. The response had already begun. And then, it had stopped. Why is the record sealed? Marek asked. Sloane answered. Because it shouldn't have happened, she said. Not defensive. Not evasive. Just true. Lyra watched her. You didn't request the record be sealed. No. The Durathi did. Yes. Why? Chin spoke. Because they entered another civilization's space without contact, he said. And the outcome documented what happens when you do that. Silence again. Heavy this time. Marek leaned back slowly. So the story became, he said quietly. He didn't finish. Lyra did. Humans are dangerous, she said. Sloane shook her head slightly. No, she said. The story became incomplete. That landed harder. Lyra looked down at the document in front of her. The clause. Clear. Specific. Exact. Not a threat. A rule. No. An instruction. She looked back up. The clause is not punitive, she said. No. It is preventative. Yes. It exists so this does not happen again. Sloane nodded. For anyone, she said. Lyra exhaled slowly. Everything aligned. The blank space. The silence. The fear. It had never been about aggression. It had been about misunderstanding. Marek spoke again, softer now. So the rule is simple, he said. Yes, Hale replied. Announce yourself. Yes. And if you don't? No one answered. They didn't need to. Because now, the silence made sense. Not fear. Not mystery. Just consequence. Lyra picked up the document. Read it once more. Then, she signed. They left the building into morning light. The city was already awake. Crowds moving, machines humming, voices overlapping into that constant human rhythm Marek had not yet learned to filter. For a while neither of them spoke. They walked in silence. Processing. Finally. Marek exhaled. That was, he started then stopped. Lyra glanced at him. Yes. I don't know what I expected, he said. But it wasn't that. No. They didn't defend themselves. No. They didn't justify anything. No. They just, he searched for the word, explained. Lyra nodded once. Because from their perspective, she said, there was nothing to defend. Marek slowed his pace. That's the part one don't understand. Lyra stopped walking. Turned to face him. That is the part you do understand, she said. He frowned. No. Yes, she replied. You are just not used to seeing it from the other side. Marek hesitated. Then, say it clearly, he said. Lyra did. If an unknown vessel enters Dominion space without identification, she said, what happens? Marek answered immediately. It is intercepted. And if it does not respond? It is escalated. And if escalation fails? Marek paused. Then, it is neutralized. Lyra nodded once. Exactly. Marek's expression shifted. Slowly. Then what they did is the same, Lyra said. But faster, Marek added. Yes. And final. Yes. Silence again. But this time, different, less fear, more clarity. Marek looked out at the city, at people moving without caution, at structures that showed no sign of defensive posture. They don't act like a species that fears invasion, he said. They don't, Lyra replied. Why? Lyra considered that carefully. Then she said, because they already lived through it. Marek looked at her. The monument, he said. Yes. A third of their population. Yes. And they stayed. Yes. Marek shook his head slowly. They built their response from that, he said. Yes. Automatic. Immediate. Absolute. Yes. And they don't question it. No, Lyra said. They refine it. That was the difference. Not rigidity. Not blind reaction. Deliberate design. Marek let out a long breath. So the galaxy saw the outcome, he said. And assumed the cause, Lyra replied. Yes. Danger. Yes. But the real cause was boundary, Lyra said. Marek looked at her. Long. Carefully. Then the blank space, he said slowly. Is not a warning, Lyra finished. No. It's an absence of understanding. Marek nodded. And fear filled that absence. Yes. They resumed walking. The city moved around them unchanged. Because for the humans, nothing had shifted. No revelation. No adjustment. This was normal. It had always been normal. Marek glanced back once. At the direction of the transit building. At dinner, he said quietly, they were arguing about a game. Yes. Completely invested. Yes. And now, he gestured vaguely, this. Lyra understood the confusion. Because she had felt it too. The two things are not separate, she said. Marek frowned. They are the same system, she continued. Explain. Lyra looked at the people around them. At the ease of movement. The closeness. The absence of tension. They commit fully, she said. To everything. Marek thought about that. The argument. Yes. The rebuilding. Yes. The response systems. Yes. All of it. Yes. Marek went quiet again. Then, that's not instability, he said. No. That's consistency. Yes. He exhaled slowly. And we thought it was unpredictability. Lyra gave a small nod. Because we only saw one side of it. They walked on. For the first time since entering human space. Marek wasn't looking for danger. He was observing. Understanding. Reframing. After a while he spoke again. So the real rule is not just, announce yourself, he said. No. It's respect the boundary. Yes. And if you do. There is no problem, Lyra said. Marek nodded once. And if you don't. Lyra didn't answer. She didn't need to. Because now. He understood. Not emotionally. Not instinctively. But logically. And logic was enough. They reached a quiet intersection. The noise softened slightly. The movement spread out. Marek looked back at the city one more time. Then said, I think we were afraid of the wrong thing. Lyra considered that. Then replied, yes. Not what they are, Marek said. But how they respond, she finished. He nodded. And for the first time, he wasn't afraid of it. He respected it. And that changed everything. They crossed the border on the return journey without ceremony. One moment the stars were unnamed. The next, the console filled with data again. Coordinates, designations, registry tags. The galaxy reasserted itself. Ordered, cataloged, defined. Marek watched the labels return in silence. It feels smaller, he said. Lyra understood what he meant. Not physically. Conceptually. The unknown had expanded something. And the known now felt contained. They continued in quiet for a while. Then Marek spoke. What are we going to say in the report? Lyra didn't answer immediately. She looked out at the stars. At the clean, precise grid overlay now visible again. At the map that had no room for uncertainty. Except one place. We will say enough, she said finally. Marek frowned slightly. That's not an answer. It is the correct one. He leaned back. They won't like it. No. They especially won't like the Durathi part. No. They built 80 years of policy on that. Yes. Marek exhaled slowly. And we're about to tell them it was wrong. Not wrong, Lyra said. Incomplete. That mattered. Marek nodded once. After a moment he asked. And the map? Lyra looked at him. He hesitated. Do we change it? He said. We have data now. Coordinates, routes, contact points. He gestured toward the console. We can fill it in. Lyra didn't look at the console. She looked out the window. At the direction they had come from. Where the blank space still existed. Unlabeled. Unclaimed. Unreduced. No, she said. Marek blinked. No. The map stays as it is. But that's inconvenient, Lyra said. Yes. Yes, she agreed. Marek sat forward. We can map it, he said. We have enough information now. No, Lyra replied. We have access to a corridor. That's still mapping. No, she said again. That is permission. Marek stopped. That distinction settled in slowly, carefully. We were given a path, she continued. Not a territory. Silence. If we want more, she said, we ask. Marek leaned back again. Thinking. Processing. That's not how we've ever done this, he said. No, Lyra replied. It's slower. Yes. It's dependent. Yes. Marek looked at her. And it's correct. Lyra nodded once. After a long moment he said, the blank space isn't ignorance. No. It's restraint. Yes. Marek looked out at the stars. At the perfectly labeled system stretching in every direction. Except one. We thought it was fear, he said. It was, Lyra replied. But not entirely. Marek nodded. Fear without understanding, he said. Yes. And now? Lyra turned her gaze back to the window. Now, she said, it can be something else. They reached the central archive 2 days later. The building felt exactly the same as it always had. So, precise, controlled. Every corridor familiar. Every system predictable. But Lyra was not. She sat at her desk and opened the report. Section by section. She wrote it all. The agreement. The conditions. The clause. And then, the truth. The Dorothy incident. All of it. No softening. No omission. Because incomplete truth was what created the problem in the first place. She paused only once. At the final section. Recommendations. She considered the room. The archive. The map system connected to it. Then she wrote. Ratify the corridor agreement. Begin structured diplomatic contact. Unseal the Dorothy record. She stopped. Then added one more line. Not required. Not standard. But necessary. Maintain current mapping status of human space. She leaned back. Read it again. Then submitted. 3 days later, she stood before the High Council. 9 members. All experienced. All cautious. All used to certainty. She presented the agreement first. Proved. Expected. Then. The Dorothy truth. The room went still. Questions came. Sure. Precise. Defensive. She answered all of them. Clearly. Directly. Without retreat. When it was done. Silence. Then. Why unseal it? One counselor asked. Because we built fear on half a story, Lyra said. And half a story leads to full mistakes. Another counselor leaned forward. And the map? He asked. We can fill it now. Lyra met his gaze. No. The room shifted. Subtly. Explain. We were given a corridor, she said. Not a claim. We were given terms. Not territory. If we map their space without permission, she continued, we repeat the original error. Silence. Heavy. Measured. And if we don't? He asked. Lyra didn't hesitate. Then we learn it properly. A long pause followed. Then. The eldest council member spoke. The map remains unchanged. Not a suggestion. A decision. Lyra inclined her head. The meeting moved on. But the outcome had already settled. Later Marek found her outside the archive. The sky above the city was clean. Every star catalogued. Every coordinate precise. Except one direction. How did it go? He asked. The agreement stands, she said. And the rest? In motion. Marek nodded. And the map? Lyra looked up. Toward the stars. Then slightly past them. To where the labels ended. It stays the same, she said. Marek exhaled. Good. She glanced at him. You agree? He nodded. Yes. Why? Marek thought for a moment. Then said. Some things you don't label. Lyra waited. You leave space for them, he added. She smiled slightly. Exactly. They stood there in silence. The mapped galaxy above them. Precise. Complete. And at its center. A blank space. Not empty. Not unknown. Just unclaimed by assumption, waiting for someone to come to the edge and knock.